Awesome. Well, hello, Prisma Day. How are we all doing today?
Good. Great.
Good. I'm very sad I can't be there in Berlin. Seems like a lot of fun. Berlin's a fun city. I unfortunately am in California, which means it is 7:54 a.m. for me. So I had to wake up a little early for this, but that's okay. You all, I presume, are staying into the late afternoon. So, welcome to the workshop. We're going to talk about Remix today, Remix in Prisma, and optimistic UI updates. Before we jump in and get started, I did drop some notes in the chat. Do you all have access to the chat on Zoom? I don't see like laptops or anything from where I'm sitting. I see a couple laptops actually. I don't see everyone with a laptop. That's totally fine if you're not following along. But there is some information in the README to the repo. I posted some links to the chat in Zoom, so hopefully you all have access to that. Did everybody get a chance to clone the repo?
Yes.
There we go. I need some enthusiastic feedback from the audience. So it's tough to gauge, not in person. So just shout from the back, say, "Yeah, we got it." Cool. Can you please send them again? I joined late. Yeah, sure. Here's the. I'll send it again just to be sure. Here's the link to the repo that you need to clone. This is what we're going to be working from. We'll walk through the important points of the README together. But I did also share some links in Zoom to make upgrading some of your dependencies a little easier if that is needed. So the big important parts before we get started are, well, for the whole README is, good to read. But the important parts here at the beginning is make sure that you're at least running Node 14. I'm running Node
Lance,
16. Yeah.
can you please zoom in like a lot?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my screen's large, so I'm not sure if this is visible. Can you all see this better?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Um, yeah, okay. Go one more level here. All right, so yeah, make sure you're running at least Node 14. I'm running Node 16, so if you want to be sure you're compatible with what I'm running, I would recommend installing Node 16. NPM v8, we are going to be running a mono repo with NPM. All of our commands are going to be run assuming that you have npm version 8 installed. So that is recommended. We've got some setup steps in here. You essentially just need to clone the repo and cd into that workspace so that we can get started. We are going to be running through different exercises. There's a script to run the app in each exercise, and you can run all of these from the root. You don't need to cd into the exercise directory directly. And yeah, that's kind of it for running the app. The there are some additional instructions here if you want to diff your code between the exercise and the final version. We have some scripts that'll help you do that. But those are the big important points that I think you'll need before we get started. So, any questions so far about what we're going to cover today or what we're up to? Cool. All right, so just make sure this chat is visible but not obstructing the view. Does not look like I can do that. Um, can you all see my chat window in the corner here?
Yep.
All right, I'm trying to hide it, but I don't think Zoom will let me do that. It just sort of sticks to the top of the screen here. I just want to make sure I can see. Since I'll be teaching, if anybody does have questions at any point, I'll try to keep an eye on the camera. Remote workshops are a little funky like that, so I can't always see everything. But just if anybody has a question and needs to stop to ask a question, just feel free to shout out, "I've got a question," and because I'll try to keep an eye. I just can't really see everyone's hands as I go. So, um, cool. Well, welcome here. My name is Chance Strickland, as you probably know. I work for Remix, and I've been a software engineer there for a little while and working on lots of different things. We're a small startup, so we've got sort of all hands in every pot at the moment. I've been working primarily on integrating Remix with various additional tooling. We're hoping to support CSS modules directly in Remix soon. So there's that, and got a lot of other stuff that we got cooking in the back burner. So that's a little bit about me. Also maintain React Router with the team and Reach UI if you've used that. It's a little bit of my background. And just a super quick note about the workshop to get started. I am going to be using TypeScript. And if you are not comfortable using TypeScript or you want to avoid it, that's totally fine. There is a branch of the repo called main-js. If you check that out, you can get the workshop in all JavaScript. So we'll get rid of all the TSX and TS files, and you'll have just the JSX files. Everything else should be identical. The reason I'm teaching in TypeScript is I think types are a really strong point for using Prisma in the first place. For using Remix, we're all TypeScript, and so I do want to at least expose you to our types as we go along. If anybody is confused by TypeScript or has any questions about what they're seeing on the screen, please just let me know. Just show of hands. I'm curious how many of you all work in TypeScript currently. Okay, so we got a good bunch. I think that's sort of where the industry's going these days. So it's kind of what I expected. But yeah, feel free to work in either case. If you're working in the JavaScript branch and you hear me say .ts or .tsx, just assume the T is a J and just go along with it that way. So cool. So we're going to build an app today. But before I start, I want to give you a quick overview of why we bothered building Remix in the first place and why I think you should use it. So Remix started as a passion project from our founders, Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson. They all are responsible for initially building React Router, and they've been contributing to the React ecosystem for quite some time now. Since the early days of React's development, and both have contributed even longer than that to the JavaScript ecosystem. So they've had a ton of experience working with React and JavaScript apps, and they've experienced the best and worst of React patterns and everything in between. So working on a lot of different types of websites, from static generated sites to tools like Gatsby, Next.js, to highly dynamic web apps like social media platforms, learning management systems, e-commerce apps, you name it, they've done it. And so I think they know a thing or two about React. And from their point of view, the existing tooling just didn't really cut it as far as ensuring that we were doing things the best way and using the platform to its fullest advantage, making sure that we were building apps with really great user experiences. So they came up with Remix first as a philosophy. And that philosophy, I think, can be summed up in just a few points. First, they want to make sure that we're embracing the web platform. The web has gotten really good over the past several years. I mean, I think it's always been pretty good, but the standards and the specs and the APIs we've gotten over the past few years have gotten great. The backends, the server services, and everything on the back end have gotten really great and really fast. And so we've really advanced enough on the backside of the stack and in the platform itself to stop leaning on systems on the front end to sort of work around some of the web shortcomings. And we want to embrace that. We also want to embrace the server client model, including a separation from rendering logic and the content and data. And that's really important for us. We are a server-side rendered framework, and you'll always be running your app with a server. We're sort of pushing away and moving away from this all static all the time approach. Static's got some great upsides for certain types of sites, but the types of sites that we want to enable you to build are highly dynamic. So really embracing the server there. We also think that we're doing a little too much with JavaScript, specifically client-side JavaScript, because everything we write is JavaScript, and we all love the language, obviously, but pushing everything to client has an overhead for the user, and we can lean on the server to prevent some of that and ship less code to the browser. And when React and Remix take over from the browser, we want to emulate the browser's behavior as closely as possible, so the user's expectations match the reality. And at the end of the day, we just don't want to abstract the underlying technologies. So to start, we're going to talk about routing. Now, Remix is built on top of React Router. Much of its power comes from routing and having full insight into your app's routes. And in a typical React Router app, you're generally going to create routes at the top level of your app inside of a routes component that is inside of a router. And you're going to have a route with an element of some sort that you are going to render when you are viewing that route on a given URL. And you would define a path like so. Now in Remix, this is all handled automatically for you by setting up all of your routes inside of a routes directory. And let me go into make sure I'm in the right exercise. Just to start, we're all should be starting in the exercise directory in 01-remix intro. Each of these exercises, by the way, is a standalone app. So I just wanted to point that out. But if we check out this app, we see we've got a routes directory and files. This reflects our URL structure. If you're familiar with Next.js, Next has a pages directory that works pretty similarly. And the name of your route files and folders represents the URL structure, as I've said. So if you've got an app routes/index, that's going to be your home route. If you've got routes/blog, that's going to be -blog. And I guess I'll just use the path name representation here. If you've got a directory inside of your routes called blog/edit, that would be mapped to the URL structure as so, and so forth. So let's to dive in even further on routing and we're going to open up our code base in our editors if we haven't already. And let's start our exercise in dev mode. So to do that, we're going to run. Can everybody see my editor okay? Do I need to zoom in further?
It's okay.
Okay, cool. So we're going to run node dev/exercise01. We also have a final directory with the end state of our each exercise. So it works the same way, node dev final/01, if you want to peek at the ending state and what we're going to end up with. So to start with the app, we're going to take a look in our routes directory as we have open here. And we see we've got a few things. We've got this empty projects directory, which I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. We don't need that now. We're just going to start with our index. We've got this home route. Let me check out my app here. We see we've got plain old page, and this is our view, right, in our index route. So to start, I'm going to create a new route inside of this directory. I'm going to call it projects. And every route is going to export a default function. And that, let me turn off Copilot so that maybe that's not so distracting here. Copilot's great, by the way. I love it, but it can be distracting in workshops. But every route is going to export a default function. It's going to be a React component, and that component represents the view for that URL. So if I create a projects component and visit/projects, we should see this component rendered in our view. Okay. Now, if I want to navigate this page to this page on my application, let's say I want a header somewhere at the top level of the site. A good place to do that here is in my root component. So this is outside of our routes component. App/root is a Remix convention, and it's outside the routes component, but it is technically a route. This is our root layout route. If you're familiar with React Router 6 already, you understand the concept of layout routes. If not, a layout route is essentially what it sounds like. It's a route that wraps other routes, essentially giving it a layout. And in React Router 6, we have this concept of nested routing, meaning that if you have a route at a top level of any given directory, it can be responsible for rendering sub routes underneath it. So children routes, parent routes, that sort of relationship. And if we take a look at the default export of this route, we see that, we've got a React component as expected, and this renders the entire shell of our application, the entire HTML document. We've got a head, we've got a body, and we've got this component from Remix called an outlet. Again, React Router 6 is the same API, but the outlet is where we render all of our children routes. Someone asked which command we start with. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat. So it's node dev exercise/01. And these are all in the README too, if you need to double check. Cool. So this is the shell. And if we wanted to add some layout to our component, we could pop it right here. I'm going to go ahead and add a header. I'm going to add a link. We can import the link from Remix Remix/React. So Remix comes with various packages, and the React package is where you're going to get all of your components and hooks and so forth. And I'm going to just link to the root route and say we've got a heading here, and I'll call this my project app. I'm not feeling particularly creative with the name here. And I also might have a nav. I'll go ahead and give it an ARIA label. This is our main navigation. And inside there, I might have a link to /projects. And of course, if you start with a slash in your to prop, that will be relative to the root. React Router and Remix ultimately also have relative routing. So we want to ensure, since we're in the root, that we're always relative to the root, which is why we start that with a slash. And then we'll just say this is our projects link. If I go back to my view, see we've got a nice, lovely header here. And since this is in the root, if I click on the projects route, I will still see projects. If I click on the home, I will still see my header here. So that's the essential purpose of a layout route. You can provide a layout to sub routes. And again, the root is the parent for all of our routes. So the same can be said of routes in our routes directory. All right, so let's go ahead and think about what we're building and what sort of routes we'll need to get started. So what we're ultimately going to build today is a to-do app. We'll call it a mini project management app. We're going to have projects, and each of those projects will have a set of to-dos. So we've got our home route already. We've got our projects route already. We also might want to create a new project, and we might want to form on a sub route for that. So we'll say we've got a projects/create. We also want a place to view our, am I still running Copilot? Stop Copilot, that's enough. We also might want a place to view an individual project, right? So this would probably be a dynamic identifier for that project. We'll say project ID, right? So this is a good route structure to start with, I think. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and start creating some new files. So inside my route directory, I'm going to create a new directory called projects that can be a home for all of my project's child routes. And inside that, I will create a file create.tsx, and I'll create another file called, and I'm going to start this one with a $sign. In Remix, if you start a route name with a $sign, it indicates that that is a dynamic path segment. So I'm going to call it project ID. I'm using camel case here because we're going to ultimately access that as a variable inside of our code. And that's just the easy way to do that. So I'm just going to copy paste from this project's route into these other routes, into create. I'll say this is my create route. Say create a project. And I'll paste into my single projects route. We'll call this my project. And we'll just say this is my project name with a placeholder for now. Cool. So again, if I navigate to, let's say I have a project subpage, and I'm just going to say projects/anything. Just anything will work at this point. We haven't validated our identifier, so we should see that we've got our. Nope, we don't, and we don't see that because we've created a layout route, but we haven't actually included an outlet. So at this point, we need to make a slight modification to our code. We've got this projects route that is responsible at this point for rendering everything underneath projects, but it also needs to render an outlet so that child routes can be rendered. I'm just going to go ahead and import this from remix run/react. Now, if I show my outlet, I should see my project name because this is now a child route. And I probably don't want this projects heading here anymore because this is going to be only visible on the index. So we want an index route for our projects as well, because we want to be able to display a listing of all of our projects. So inside of my projects directory, I'll also create an index.tsx. That X is important because it needs to understand JSX. And I'll just go ahead and copy pasta that as well. Say this is our projects page. And I'll put the main tag there. I don't actually need a layout technically for my projects, but I'm going to keep it around anyway because we might want to add one later. But I'm just going to return the outlet. If I omitted this file altogether, this projects file, this is essentially what would happen by default. It would just use a an outlet from Remix run/React. But I'm going to keep this here because I might want to add a shared layout to projects in the future. Doesn't hurt to have it. Cool. So now if we take a look at our project, again, we've got our single project view. We should have a listing of projects. At least we have a heading at the moment. And we should have a create route. Nope, we have project/create. That's important. And then we should have a home route. Everybody still with me? Any questions so far? Cool. So we've got all of our routes. Now we need to actually talk about some data. This is obviously important because we've got some routes, but nothing to actually show you. So eventually we're going to want to work with the database, and we're going to bring in Prisma. This is Prisma Day after all, to help us interface with it. So I want to talk about reading, writing, mutating data in Remix. So React's component model is awesome. I love React. I wouldn't be here if I didn't love React. But the way we normally go about dealing with data, I think, in React applications, or at least the patterns that are encouraged in React applications, cause some problems for us. Specifically, if we fetch data at the component level, especially if you're not using any abstractions like React Query or SWR that can't manage that data flow for you, oftentimes what we end up with is a request waterfall, which essentially means you've got one component that fetches some data, say maybe it's fetching some information about a user, and it sits up here, and that component renders and it fires off that request, and then you have another request made further down the tree. That request happens later because we await the results of a promise higher up in the tree, and we end up with this network request waterfall. And in Remix, we encourage you to fetch data on the server, and we encourage you to fetch it at the route level rather than the component level. What this is going to do is it makes it clear what requests are having on any particular route. With nested routes, we're going to potentially make multiple requests because any request made at the top level of the nesting hierarchy will also be made in all of the sub routes. However, Remix always parallelizes those requests, so they fire concurrently, and we don't have to wait on one to finish before we kick off another, thus reducing the network waterfall and making your app run much faster for the user. So we are going to start by, I'm going to start in my individual project because we're going to need to fetch some data. Actually, before that, let's start in the projects instead. I think this is a good place, my project/index, because we want to get a listing of each individual project, right? So to do that, I need to fetch some data, but I don't have a database set up at the moment. So I'm just going to create some fake data. I'm going to call this projects. You don't have to write all of this out because this is just placeholder stuff. You're more than welcome to, but I'm going to make this projects an array. It's going to be an array of objects. I'm going to have each project going to have an identifier. We'll say ID is prep, and I need to give it a name, and I'll say prepare for Prisma Day. It's my first task, or my first project rather. I'm going to have a project, we'll call it build, and I'll say I need to build the course material. And then after I'm done preparing, I'm going to go for a surf session. And we're just going to say go surfing, not web surfing. I like to actually surf on the water. Any other surfers in the room? It's tragic. It's real fun. I guess not everybody lives in San Diego, where pretty much half the population surfs. But anyway, all right. So we've got some static projects here, and now we can we could just render them directly in our route. But of course, these are we're trying to simulate an actual request here. So assume that these projects are located in our database somewhere. We want to go and make those requests, fetch that data, and make them available to our route. So in Remix, we can export a function that we call a loader. It's an async function. Actually, I'm going to make it a const because I want to use the types here. I'm going to make it an arrow function, and I'll say loader is going to be of type loader function. And we get this from our server runtime, but we're using Node. So just to back up a bit, I said at the beginning, Remix ships with various packages. Remix supports different runtimes. So we've got adapters for Node, for Dino, deploy Cloudflare workers, Cloudflare pages. So we can support multiple different runtimes, but this app is running on Node. So I'm going to import this type from remix run / node. And that's going to give us this loader function type. And again, it's an async function. And it's going to handle some arguments for us. And inside this, so this loader function only ever runs on our server. Remix has a compiler that automatically code splits our routes so that it pulls out anything that runs on the server into its own bundle. It pulls everything that runs on the browser into its own bundle so that we can co-locate this code nicely between the route component and the server code. So loaders are always called on the server and on the server only. And as such, we can use node-friendly code inside of our servers and inside of our loaders and go ahead and set up these requests. So first thing I'm going to need to do in my projects to get my project listings is I want to fetch my projects. So I might say projects is a result of fetch from whatever, or maybe you have some database function. It's an async function and it's get projects. And that's going to handle fetching all, I guess I should say await here. It's going to await and get all of your projects, and then you get that listing and return them. But of course, this is static. We're simulating static results. So I'm just going to use this variable up here instead just to make this go a little quicker. You also want to validate all your inputs and outputs. So make sure that the thing that you get from the database actually reflects the shape of the data that you're working with. So we would say, I'll just go ahead and make some to-dos here. We'll say fetch the data. Might say validate the data, very important. And then once we've validated and we're ready to go, we can then return the data. But we don't just return the data directly. We need to return a response. So the loader is essentially handling an HTTP GET request. And when you make a request, the server returns a response to the browser. And so loaders are always going to return a response. So we could say return new response object. And you need to serialize the data that goes into your response. And so the response body will say stringify is, we're going to send our projects down. I'm going to send that in an object. And then you can initialize that request with some additional information. We can say it's going to have a 200 status. We can say it's also going to have some headers potentially. I'm going to construct some headers here. And we're going to have a, let's say, content type is application / JSON, right? So we can return that data as a response. And then to access that data, we go down into our route function and we call, we can get that data from another function that we get from Remix. This comes from Remix, a React package, and this is going to be a hook called useLoaderData. Now, when we call, we'll just say data equals useLoaderData, and we will console log that data. Anyone want to guess what that's going to look like? I guess I can zoom in super close. It's an array of our projects. So essentially what we've done here is we've returned a response from the server. We can access that response inside of our route so that we have it in the browser, and all of that data loading has happened on the server before we ever get to the browser. And Remix already deserializes that data. I keep thinking this is on the other screen. Maybe I should just move it. That'll make this simpler. Keep swiping left and right anyway. So Remix is going to deserialize that data for us, and we're going to get an array of our projects, just as we would expect. And so now that I have those, I can create a list. I can say, I'm going to destructure this and call it projects. Because if I validated my response up here, I should always be sure that we're working with our projects. And since this is generic, I might say we've got projects, and I'll import this from Prisma since I've set up a database there. And this should have a similar shape. I'm going to say, actually, it's an object, right? This is a generic function, so we should be able to give it a type signature. And now we can loop through our projects an array of projects. Any questions about this so far? Project.id, and we'll render a project.name. And there are our projects. We can also link to those by providing a link component. Again, from Remix, just pop this guy in here. We'll move our key to the top level. And we'll say this is going to go to, and since we can do relative routing here, we can just say to project.id. Do we import our link properly? Should have turned off ESLint here. It's going to be yelling at me a lot with my imports. Cool. So now we've got links. We can go to an individual project and see we can render our project name. It's great. So let's go back to our individual project ID. And let's do the same thing here. I'm just going to copy one of my projects here. So we have some static data. I'm going to give it a few more properties. I'm going to have a description. We'll say, and not much to go surfing. We might also have some to-dos associated with this. And these to-dos will have like an array of another object. We always want an identifier on our things. I'll just say ID and then say name, wave. Might have a completed property, and we'll say this is, we haven't caught a wave yet. And maybe we can say ride the wave. I'll just say I've already caught it. Let's have one of these guys be true. And then we can say jump off and catch another. Just make sure these IDs are unique as well. All right, so now we've got a project with some to-dos, and same as we had before, assuming we are working with a database here, we can export a loader. Might always wants to import from server runtime. Auto imports are great in VS Code if they actually work. Sometimes they don't get it from the place that I need to get it from. That's okay. And again, this will be an async function. And yeah, we're just going to return a new response. And actually, I don't want to return a new response. This is kind of ugly, I think, right? Like, who wants to remember and type all this stuff for every response that they have to type out? I don't like it. So luckily for me, Remix also provides a little helper function, also imported from the Node package called JSON. And JSON, what it's going to do for us is essentially construct that response for us with some reasonable defaults, and it's going to serialize our data. So the thing that we return, or the thing that we pass to JSON, is our data. So assuming we've done all the prior steps, we've fetched the data, validated the data, and I'll just go ahead and add handle any errors. These are the steps that you would take in a real situation. Assuming we've done all of these things, we can pass our data to the JSON function. And by default, it's going to assume that if we don't give it a specific status code, it's going to be 200 OK. So 200 status code, OK, no errors. But you could also pass an additional status code if you did have an error, or if you had a different status code you wanted to use. Any HTTP status code can be passed as a second argument. You could also pass an object and say status 500 and status text with a specific message about why something may have failed. But again, we're just passing we're just assuming it's a 200. So I'm going to go ahead and just pass our project as such. And so I can go ahead and get my project from use loader data. And I can start using it. I'm going to say this is also a project type. And now I can start doing something with my project. So I've got, let's say, what do I want to render here for my project? I might render a header here with a project name. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this guy. And then here, I will say project.name. Say if we have a project.description, right there, let's just go ahead and check our app. There we go. We should see what we would expect to see. And then I might have a section here underneath. We'll say is our tasks. And then I might have a, say, a list of our tasks, right? And we'll say project.todos. We don't have anything here. Let me go ahead and I think I have a types package here at the root. I do. Also in Remix, if you want to import anything from the root at any level on the route hierarchy, you can just start your import statement with a little tilde. That's an automatic convention in Remix, but you can also update that in your TS config. Oops, that's in the root here. In your TS config for your app, it should show you that we are using this path inside the paths option here. So we're importing this type. I think I've abstracted over the Prisma type here, so it should be more accurate. So we should have this list of to-dos, and we can map through them and say we want to return. I'm going to make this an input, so we're going to have a label. Say to-do dot name. And we want to also render a checkbox for this since it is a task. We'll say our name. I'll just say type checkbox for now. Make sure we give it a key because we are using a list. And let's just double check and see what we are working with here. Cool. So we've, it's not the prettiest list in the world, but it works. These are all of our tasks. So we've successfully loaded some data. We have handled, hopefully we've validated that data and handled any errors. And inside of our route component, we have loaded that data and used it to render our component. I'm going to pause here. Any questions so far? I'm working through these things relatively fast because it's a short workshop. So please let me know. Any questions so far about what we've done? Double check the chat just to be sure. A loader function by default, JSON serializes the return value though, right? Yes, it does. However, the reason I didn't mention that is because we do plan on deprecating that in the future to make sure that you're explicitly returning serializable data. The reason for that is because a lot of folks get confused about the serialization part. They'll do something like return date, new date, right? And then down here, they'll get their date and they'll expect to be able to call functions on the date object. And that's not going to work because when you serialize the date, it's going to call toString and you're just going to end up with a string type. So this really trips up a lot of folks. And so we want to make it explicit that we're always serializing the data. So in a future version of Remix, we will likely deprecate the automatic serialization. So that's why I didn't mention that. Regarding TypeScript and Remix, any tips and tricks around typing loaders actions and use loader data action data? This is a topic that has come up a lot. And it's something that we will probably adjust in time. There's some issues with typing loaders and loader data functions. The main issue is that I think it gives you, in some cases, a false sense of security. Remember I said number 2, validate data. Like that should always be the step 2 for any thing that happens on the server. If you have any sort of input coming from a request, you need to validate that because that's an attack vector and you need to make sure that the data you get is the data that you expect. And so what happens if, let's assume that we made the loader function generic and it enforced that we returned this return type of project. You know, if we did that and we skipped the validation part, we get this false sense of security that what we've returned is actually a project, right? And so we want to discourage that as much as possible. So we don't, this is not a generic function. So instead what we do is we say at the point of return, you can say return JSON, and the JSON function is in fact a generic function. So we can say we want to return an object with a project shape, and it takes a project. And now it's going to error because we haven't actually returned the project of matching the shape. So if we said anything else, we're going to get an error, like a type error, because this is not what it expected to have, right? So, and we get a type error too, because this does not exactly match up with our database project, but you get the idea. JSON function is generic, and you can type it that way. And the same with use loader data. If you know what you return up here in your loader, you can pass the same type here. So what I usually do here is I just make an interface that is my loader type, my loader data. And that way I can share it between the two. And then I will pass that in both places. Now, in the future, I mentioned that we might change this, and that is true. We might change this setup so that use loader data in your routes can infer the return type from your project, because at the end of the day, the loader data that comes into your app, you shouldn't need to double validate this when it's coming into your project. As long as you validate it on the server, you should be fine when you use it in your component. So I would say this is the pattern you can use today in Remix for your TypeScript types and loaders. But in the future, we might try to do more to infer that type. So, any other questions? Cool. So feel free to drop those in the chat if you do. We're going to go ahead and quit out of this exercise. I'm going to go and close all this, and we're going to move on to exercise numero dos. So node dev slash exercise slash O2. Same script we ran before, just change the exercise number, and we should be starting up our next app. All right. So we're in the second exercise. We should have stopped the process from the previous exercise. If you didn't, it should be fine. This is a different port anyway. I heard some chatter back there. Were there any questions? I can't hear you super well, but if you do shout anything, I should be able to hear it. Does Remix support mobile app development? Maybe. I haven't explored that, but I don't know. Maybe someone will create a React Native adapter, and you can build a React Native app using Remix. I don't know. That'd be a really cool thing to explore. But the cool thing about the Remix architecture is that you can write your own adapters. You can write your own server runtimes. We really open up the API to allow you to do that kind of stuff. So very cool. Yeah. And isn't the JSON/date also a lie? Yeah, it is a lie. But we at least try to make it explicit. We could restrict that type to anything that is serializable, but at the end of the day, date is also serializable. It'll just call the toString method, which serializes it. And we just want to make sure that you're thinking about that. We can't prevent every foot gun in TypeScript, but we can do our best. And I think making it explicit at least helps a little bit. So, all right. So number two. So this is Prisma Day. I'm hoping you've all used Prisma to some degree, or at least you're familiar with it and how you normally set it up. But I'm going to go into this database/server file I'm going to let's go ahead in our number 2 exercise. So we've got in this Prisma directory, we've got a few things. We have a schema and we have a seed script. We'll talk about those a little bit in a moment. But when you should have run npm run setup. If you haven't already, go ahead and quit your process and run npm run setup. And what this is going to do, this was in the README, but I forgot to mention it. So if you hadn't run npm run setup, please do that, because what this is going to do, it's going to set up your database and it's going to seed it with some initial data so that when you actually start working with it, you'll have that data to work with. So kind of important there. Sorry, I dropped that one. Cool. So let me run that dev script again. All right. All right. So inside of our app directory now, we have this file called db.server.ts. And so this is where we instantiate Prisma. So all you really need to do to instantiate Prisma client is instantiate it. And now you have the Prisma object, but this is a developer mode thing. So in production, we instantiate it once and it persists on the server. But in development, every time our auto reload or our live reload runs, we don't want to reinstantiate it. So we set it as a global in development only, just for an optimization there. So we're not instantiating our Prisma client multiple times. And we only want to connect to that database once for a more efficient app here. So And then I've got this, we don't worry about this function. This is a Prisma client error handler that I wrote. Prisma will give you specific error messages that we can use to generate our response codes accordingly. So we've instantiated Prisma client, we've exported it, and now we can use this anywhere in our code. And just a note about the .server suffix here. This is a hint to the Remix compiler that this code should only ever run on the server. If you accidentally include it in anywhere that runs in the client, you should get a more specific error that helps you figure that out. So this is something that I like to do to make sure that our database stuff only runs on the server, so that I make sure because it's easy to goof up when these things are co-located in routes. So yeah, just a note about that. So we'll also take a look in the Prisma directory. We've got this schema. This is the shape of our database tables. We've got this user table. We're not going to set up auth today just because of time, but we do have a user table and a password table for the user. We've also got this this note. This is wrong. Hold on. Something is wrong here. Okay, so I have the wrong schema in this particular thing. I don't know how that happened, but I'm going to go ahead and grab it from elsewhere. So I'm sorry about that. I don't know how that slipped through. So final/for/optimism/prisma. This should work. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and run my npm setup command again. If this disrupts your flow, I'm very sorry. I'll have to update that in the repo. In the meantime, while that's doing, I've got another question, sort of related, but I probably won't get the chance to ask. So in this file, there's a DB connection string. How can we obscure this so it's not visible in the Docker file? It has a username and password, I believe. Yeah, so you can use environment variables for that. In fact, you probably should use environment variables for that. I don't personally do a lot of work in Docker, so I'm not 100% sure how you access environment variables. It looks like you can access this here. If you're more familiar with Docker than I am, you probably know that better. But yeah, just I would put any references in an environment variable. All right, let's try this again. All right, so now we understand our schema. We've got a seed script that should have generated a user for us as well as a few projects. So let's go ahead in our app and take another look at let's start with our projects index here. So I'm going to start by making some requests to get our database here. So I'm going to go ahead and import Prisma from, it's going to be in the root directory. It comes from this db.server file. And I'm going to go ahead and export a loader. Still wants to import. I'm not even going to bother with you. Wish I could tell VS Code that you're always wrong with this import. And then I'm going to just go ahead and create a function here. All right, so now that we've got our loader, we want to load some data. We're looking to load a project. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to go ahead and declare this project. I'm going to say it's going to be a type project. I'm going to get that from my types here, just to make sure I'm working with the right thing. So I've got this project. I'm also going to go ahead and import my JSON function because I know I'm going to want to use that. And since I am working with the database, I'm going to go ahead and set this up in a try catch. And I'm going to say my project. Oh, I'm getting multiple projects. All right, this is the index. So let's say projects and say, we're going to go ahead and reassign this and say projects. We're going to await Prisma.project dot find many. And I love Prisma so much. It makes this stuff so easy. I'm going to select anything where I'm going to make sure I get my IDs for those. I also want to make sure I get my name. But I think that's all we need in this case. I also want to include my to-dos. What's our issue here? Anybody spot a problem with my query here? Prisma project find many. This should be an async function.
Someone just commented you should.
What's that?
Someone was just commented you're missing a const, but I'm not sure. That
shouldn't be, because that's fine. We're declaring the variable up here. I'm not sure what's going on.
It's a where, no? Yeah, I'm missing the where. I think on the.
Yeah, no. Wait, where is that? We shouldn't need a where. We should need a select. ID is equals true. We're going to just reconstruct this for a moment.
And see. The await. Oh, yeah, you were just missing the await and the personalizer.
Well, I had that a moment ago, I thought, but let's maybe to-dos. What's going on here? No, maybe that's what it's expecting. Excuse me, I'm going to go ahead and cheat because I don't, maybe I missed, I forgot the API for Prisma could have been. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what I'm doing wrong. So in my final directory, I don't want to take up all of our time debugging something that I should have gotten right. This should be of type projects. Oh, you know what? You know why this is? Because this is actually the wrong type. This is going to be the Prisma type because we're not getting our to-dos here. Sorry about that. I was really confused for a moment. So we're going to go ahead and just return JSON, and we're going to say projects. And then if we get an error, I'm just going to go ahead and you can throw a response to, which is nice because Remix has this concept of error handling. We use these catch and error boundaries or components that you can import from Remix to handle any errors that are thrown from the server. It's quite nice. We're not going to set those up just out of time, but we're going to say if we have any sort of error, we normally want to handle that error, handle the error a little bit better, but we're just going to throw a 500 and then we'll let our boundaries handle that. So we've got our projects here, and I'm going to go back into I'm just going to copy paste all of the stuff from my projects index here. This is actually also the wrong file. I'm sorry about that. I'm goofing up all over the place this morning. Should be in our projects index here because it's not our layout component. Just going to delete all of this for now. This is the joy of live coding. All right, so now we want to get our projects from use loader data. And we should, as long as everything else goes my way today, and our database script ran as we would expect, we should get a listing of our projects, which we do. We go ahead and take a look at each project. We should see that we've got our single project view, but this is still static because we haven't handled the loader in our single project view. So let's go ahead and set that up next. Now we're going to have a loader here as well. Just going to leave the import alone for now. Should be fine. So we've got our loader function. We're going to make another request. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and look for a project here. This one, I think, is going to be a type project from my types because I want to include my to-dos here. So, and then I'm going to try catch. Go ahead and say my project. We're going to say is Prisma dot project dot find unique in this case. And in this case, we need our where clause, because we need to say where's ID is equal to some identifier, right? So we need to go ahead and figure out that identifier. We've got arguments that come into our loader function, and this args object is going to have a few properties on it. One of them is params. Now the params are any parameters that we have in our route hierarchy structure. And in this case, we've got, so if you have parent routes, you might have dynamic route segments in those as well. So those will all be attached to your params, even in child routes. But in this case, our dynamic route segment is called project ID. So our params object is going to have a project ID. And we want to validate that. We want to say if project ID, we'll say if type of project ID is not equal to string, which it should always be, but we just want to double check and make sure that it's actually defined. We will go ahead and throw here a response. We'll say 422, I think, or maybe 400. Subjective, I think. So we'll just say 400. And I'll go ahead and grab this from my node package as well. All right. Just clean up my types, my imports. All right. So go ahead and get rid of that guy. And so now we've got our project ID. We can validate it by just attempting to use it at this point. And we want to go ahead and include our to-dos. Fingers crossed. I did it again. Non-assignable to project with to-dos. You know what? I'm just going to skip my types for now because I'm not worried about you. So we've got a project. It should have our to-dos on it because we've asked it to include our to-dos. Let's just double check the actual type. Yeah, should include our to-dos. So we should be fine. And so if we don't have a project, if our identifier has not worked out for us, we can go ahead and throw here. In fact, I'm going to throw outside because I'm going to try catch. So I'm going to say if we don't have a project yet, go ahead and throw a 404 response. And if we do, we're just going to return that and serialize it. And if we end up with any errors in our request here, we'll just go ahead and throw another 500. Cool. Now, done in our route, we can just do as we would expect. I'm going to say use loader data. And this I'm going to go ahead and make generic because I do want to use my type that I created. I'll import that from our types. Clean that up. We should turn off that ESLint rule. I'll do that in the next exercise. Let's go ahead and get rid of this guy. We don't need our static project anymore. Right, so let's take a look and see how this looks. So we've got our project. We've got our name at the top. I also have a project description underneath. And we've got our to-dos. We're mapping through them, and we're rendering our checkbox. If we don't have any tasks, we'll just make a little note that we don't have any tasks. Go back and double check. So we don't have any tasks for this particular project. We do have, you might have different tasks. This is just what I was goofing around with earlier, and I haven't reseeded my database. Please don't kill the cat, by the way. That would be very rude, and I'm sure the cat would not appreciate that. But we've got our views. Everything seems to work. Any questions so far? I goofed up a couple times there in my live coding, so it may have confused some folks. So any questions? Feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I've got that open in the corner too. So if you got any questions, you can go there. I'll try and go through and answer some of these in writing when the workshop is over, as long as Zoom still allows me to do that. But yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clarifying things along the way if anything's confusing here. Okay, sounds like I got nothing. So that's loading data. We've successfully loaded some data from our database. We've made all of these requests on the server, passed those along so that our client bundle doesn't include all of that logic. And we can go ahead and check off that on our list. But our to-do list isn't very useful now because our actions don't actually do anything. We want to be able to mark our to-dos complete. We want to be able to make sure that the database is updated. So next we're going to talk about mutating data. So I'm going to go ahead and quit this guy, and we're going to run our next exercise slash 03. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all this stuff for the moment. And I'm going to start in, let's start in our, first of all, let me just open the app. So we've got a slightly different view here. We've got our database loading. All of that seems to be working. We've got this create a project button. So I think a good place to start would be our create project route. Let's go ahead and build that out. So go and make sure you're in the proper directory, exercise slash 03. We're going to go into our routes, and we're going to go into project slash create. So right now we've just got a blank shell, and I want to create a form that's going to allow us to actually create a new project. So I'll just start with a form. Give it a we'll start some inputs. So I'm going to say wrap these in a label. Give this label be, we'll say we need a project name. We'll create an input. And we'll say this is a name input. We'll say this is required. And I'll go ahead and create another one for the project description. And we'll make the name description. And I think that's all we need. So let's go ahead and create a submit button. And we'll just say, go ahead and give this a class name of button, just because I have some styles on that already. And yeah, I think we're good. Let's go ahead and save that. So if I click on create a project, we should see, make my project description a text area. Maybe it's a multi-line description. There we go. Cool. So we've got our create a project view. Now, if we submit anything at the moment, nothing's going to happen. First of all, form by default has a method of get. We want to change this to post. So make sure that we're making a post request with our form. But where does it actually post to? What route is it going to post to? Well, by default, it will post to whatever route we're currently on or whatever URL we are currently on. So it's going to post to this URL, which is totally fine for our cases. But to actually deal with that post request, we need another method. And Remix is going to give us the ability to export a action, which is similar to a loader. But the action is going to handle all of our post requests. It's going to also take some arguments like params. It's going to take our request, the request object. And this is where we're going to handle mutating some data. So before I do that, just as I want somebody to volunteer. I know it's a quiet bunch, but I want somebody to volunteer. I need some feedback here. What's the first thing that we do normally in a React app when it's time to write a form? Anybody? What if we need access to the data in the form? What do we do? I hear somebody, I can't quite understand. Need a little louder.
We use Formic.
Use Formic. Yeah, no, that's very true for most people. Use Formic. You need some way to manage that state, though, right? You need to access that state. And then on the form, you might say on submit. If you're writing this from scratch and not using Formic, because I think that's everybody's answer, right? Your default is go use a library because forms are hard. Yeah, they can be pretty hard if you do it this way. But you would say something like on submit. We're gonna the first thing that we do is prevent the default, right? We tell the browser, don't do what you normally do. We're gonna handle it. And then in handling it, we're going to take this data that we're managing in state. And if you have 20 different form fields, you got to manage all the state of those inputs. And then you got to take that state, validate it in the client, and then send it off wherever you send it off. You got to make that request. Usually that's going to happen in some use effect, and you're going to have to keep track of that fetch request. If you want to handle race conditions, you're going to have to cancel that request if another one comes in before it's fulfilled. It's a lot of complexity, which is why the answer here was use Formic, right? Let somebody else handle that complexity. I don't want to think about it. But thankfully, we don't have to think about it in Remix either, and you don't need to pull in Formic because forms are handled beautifully by the browser by default if we just submit the post request as we normally would if we were just using a regular old form, right? So in this case, I've got this action, and this is where we handle all of our post requests. So we don't need to manage the state of any of our inputs because we're going to get that all that inputs at the time of the request is made. We're going to get those as form data, and those are going to come from our request. I'm going to go ahead and type this action function. Guess what? It's going to import from server runtime. Of course you are. That's fine. It should be the same type. We're going to get a request object. So the request that we make, it's going to be accessible in our action. Let's write all this out. Let's just go through the flow of what we would need to do if we're making a post request. So if we're writing data, the first thing that we probably want to do is authenticate our user. The second thing we might want to do is gather data from the request. So we're going to get some form data when we submit a form. Of course, we always want to validate that data. We don't want to save anything to the database that's not been validated. We want to then, once we validated, save the data, or we'll say write data to the database. And then we want to return a response with said data. And finally, we just want to make sure we're handling our errors along the way. So there's a fair bit of work we need to do in the action to make sure that we're working and saving the right data. But that's pretty much the flow of our action. All right, so let's take a look. So the user part, I'm just going to say to do. We haven't set up off because we haven't set up, we just don't have time for all that, but won't have time to walk through authentication. So we're just going to assume that we have whoever's our current user. We'll just go ahead and get the first user for that because we do need a user because of our database schema. So I'm just going to say my user is, get this from Prisma. We're going to say user/find. I'm just going to find the first user. Oh, not an async function. Let's fix that. All right, and say if we don't have a user for whatever reason, it means we probably goofed up and didn't see the database. I'm just going to throw error. Please see your database. Cool. That'll just crash our app. I think that's probably the right thing to do in this particular case. So now we've got our user. In a real app, we'd authenticate that. But now we want to get our form data. What came through from the request? So the request object has a method called form data. It is going to be async. So we're going to go ahead and get our form data from the request. And then we can get our form fields. We had a field called name. So form data.get, we can get our name. We had a description. What are our types supposed to be for these form fields? What would you expect a form field type to be? A string, right? It's just a text field. However, our form fields might submit we might have a multi-part form, which is what we would be working with if we were doing any sort of file upload. So again, we want to make sure that we're validating this data and ensure that it's what we expect it to be. So probably a lot more validation you want to do to make sure that you don't get any malicious types here. But I'm just going to check if name is not type of string. Then I want to throw, just say 422 should be sufficient here. Go ahead and import our JSON. Whoops. And then we'll go ahead and do the same. And actually, I want to make sure that we actually have a name. So if this is an empty string, we want to make sure we say the name is actually required. I'll just go ahead and add some more explicit status text here. And so we'll do the same thing with description, but the description is optional. So we'll only do this check if we have a description. And yeah, so now we've validated data, not very good validation, but it's enough for our purposes. And so next we need to write some data to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a try catch here. All right, so so we're creating a new project. I want to say a new project is equal to, say, wait, Prisma project create. We're testing my memorization skills of the Prisma API. So let's see, I think it takes data. And let's see, name. Perfect. That's a string. Description. We're just going to say description is, if it's nothing, we're just going to use a blank string. We'll say it also needs a user. I think we'll say user ID here. User.id. I think that should be sufficient. Cool. So this should be a project. It is, looks like. So now we have that. If for whatever reason this doesn't succeed, we can go ahead and just throw 500. And now we could return this project as data because that's what we said we were going to do. But what I want to do in this case is I want to redirect the user. I want to redirect them to the project view once we have made this request. So instead of returning the data in the response, I'm going to use this additional helper, this redirect helper that we get from Remix as well. And redirect is going to allow us to, as you guessed it, return a redirect response that will send them to a separate page. Make sure to get that from the right package here. All right. So down here, I'm going to return a response with redirect. Return redirect. And you do need to return because it is a response object, even though it does redirect you. And we're going to redirect to the /projects/ project ID. I need to pull this out here. And I'm going to say, all right, that should be good. I do need to check if no project should have a project. There's no reason I shouldn't have a project at this point because we should have just created it, but just to double check. All right, so now we have a project and project ID. We've handled errors along the way, so we can get rid of all that. All right, now we've got our form. Let's go ahead and try and use it. All right, so let's create a new project. Teach folks how to use Remix. I'm feeling very creative. Let's create that. Name is required. Let's see what we did wrong. We goofed up something here. See if no name is required. Boom, that'll do it. Let's try that again. Boom, there we go. There's our project. Now we need to create some to-dos for said project. So that's probably a good place to go next, I think. So let's go into our individual project view. We could create an action here and do the same thing that we did in the create route. But what I want to do instead is I want to create a couple different routes because if I think about this for a second, I might have a few different actions I want to take on this page. I've got the project. I might want to be able to delete the project. I might also want to be able to create a to-do. I want to be able to mark a to-do complete. I might also want to be able to delete a to-do from my list. So there's just several different actions, and they all sort of point to different places, right? Different concerns. Deleting the project, deleting to-dos, those seem like different things to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a few new routes. I'm going to create a new folder in my routes directory. I'm going to call it to-dos. And in to-dos, I'm going to create a couple new files. I want to say create, and I want to say complete. So marking to-dos complete. I'm going to skip the delete action for now, just for the sake of time. In projects, I might also want to create a delete action there as well, but I think I'll just start with these. So these are going to be separate routes, and I'll explain in a moment why. But let's say when I create a new to-do, that should be my first task. I'm going to export an action. Any questions so far while I type all this out? Got a couple things in the chat. I think, hold on. Thought I did. request rate limit. What are your solutions for it? It's sort of out of scope for this, but you should be able to handle all of the rate limiting. You do have to handle some of that manually, but there are a lot of node module tools that you can use to do that. Think of actions and loaders as a primitive for any server, right? You're basically just accessing any logic on your server. So any rate limiting you need, you can set that up, and your loaders or actions are in a separate .server file. But yeah, it's a little out of scope for this workshop, so we won't really walk through rate limits. Cool. I think that's everything. I don't think I saw anybody other questions. If I'm missing something, please let me know. Cool. So we've got action here. So what's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to auth the user. We're going to gather data from the request. We're going to, so we know what we're doing here. We're going to create a new thing. So we need to first validate data. We also need to then save the data to database and return a response to data and handle errors. All right, so that's kind of what we need to do for our actions. So let's go ahead and do them. So at the very top, we're going to go ahead and get some form data from our request. So I need to get that request object. I'm going to say to do auth user because we don't have auth yet. So the gathering data part, I'm going to go ahead and say let form data is equal to wait request.form data. And then I need a couple of things from my form. I need a to-do name. I also need a project ID. These are the moments when I do wish that I had Copilot turned on, because Copilot helps me fill this stuff out pretty quickly. So that's everything that I need there. I might want to validate the data. I'm just going to say to do now because we need to start moving. I want to save the data to the database. I don't want to stress the importance enough of validation, but we're just trying to move pretty quickly at this point. I guess I'll go ahead and at least type check these things. So, because I think TypeScript will yell at me. That should be sufficient for now. And then we want to save the data to the database once we validated. So I'm going to pop this into try catch as we always do because we want to handle errors. So I'm going to say my to do is equal to say Prisma to do dot create. That's what we're doing. We're creating a new to do in this case. We're going to create it with some data. We're going to say our to do is going to have a name. It's going to be associated with a project ID. And that should be good for our to do. By default, the to do will not be completed. I think we also have a completed prop that we could set, but we're just going to say the default is not completed. And if we have a to do, we are going to return response with the to do. And if we don't, we're going to just throw a 500. Any questions so far? Handled some errors. Cool. All right, so we've got our create action. I'm not going to actually create a route view for this. This is what we in Remix would call a resource route. So a resource route is essentially, if you don't have a route view for this, you essentially only have a way to handle requests to that route. So think of this like an API route where you make a request to that endpoint, and with some data, we can do something with that endpoint. This can handle gets or posts just like a regular route can. They're pretty awesome. And I like to use these instead of loading up unrelated actions and loaders into routes, just because the logic happens to live in that route, which is really nice because you can access all of this stuff from any way that you can access any API, right? So this sort of helps us create external facing APIs. You can create a whole REST API using resource routes, which I think is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and set up an action. I'm going to go ahead and copy paste some stuff to save some time here. So this is our complete action. This is where we're going to mark a to-do complete. So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to, and actually this is, I'm going to put this in a subdirectory. I want to-dos. I want to have a to-do ID. So when I complete a to-do, I want to make that endpoint include the ID of the thing that we're going to complete, of the task that we're going to complete. I'm just going to move that complete route here. So I'm going to get my to-do ID from params. And params just works the same way as our project ID. And I'm going to go ahead. I know this is going to be a string, so we'll just move a little quicker. I'm going to mark the to-do off for later. And we're going to go ahead and get the rest of our data. A guy named Sergio, whose last name I forget, unfortunately, who's really active in the Remix community. He's done a lot of really cool work. He has a package. I'll go ahead and pop it in the chat down here. Where is my chat? There we go. It's called Remix Utils. And he has a lot of really great utilities that make some of this repetitive stuff go a little quicker. So yeah, so let's see, we've got our form data. Let's go ahead and get the completed state. We're going to assume this is going to come from an input type checkbox. So we're going to say get name completed is what we'll use. With the checkbox, you might think that the data you would get would be a Boolean for a checkbox, but you would not be right if you assume that, which is what I assumed for a long time. The form data that comes from a checkbox is actually a string or null, kind of strange. But the reason for that is checkboxes can actually be an indeterminate state. So technically, we would have 3 states in a checkbox that we'd have to deal with. So I'm going to say the completed is our completed state is going to be if whether or not completed is equal to on, because on is the state that we would get if the checkbox is actually checked. Otherwise, it would be null, or if it was indeterminate for whatever reason, it would be mixed, I believe, is the state. So a little strange in the API there, but that's the web. Cool. And so now let's go ahead and try and catch as we do. And another thing that's really cool about sort of some of these patterns is that you can abstract a lot of this stuff into helper functions. So you can have like a helper function that says auth user, and as long as this throws or returns a response, we could completely abstract this at the top of our function by just calling auth user. Right? You could do the same with a lot of these other repetitive tasks. I'm just spelling it out because we need to understand what these APIs actually look like. So I'm going to say we're going to get a to-do from Prisma. Oops, I think we already imported Prisma dot to-do dot. We're going to update at this point, and we're going to say where ID is equal to to-do ID. We are going to add some data, and we're going to say completed is equal to whatever we got up here. So if form data is on, then it's on. Otherwise, it's off. And then as long as it's successful, we're going to return a response with our new to-do. And if not, we're going to throw a response with 500. All right. So now we've got a new resource route for complete. We've got a resource route for create. So we should be able to go back into our project and make this stuff come to life. So how do we do that? We don't have the action available directly here. So what we need to do instead is we're going to create some forms the same as we did before. Do we have our create a task button yet? I don't think that we do. All right. So what I'm going to do first is under my section here, I'm going to create a new section. I'll use this aside. and it's going to house our form for creating. And we're going to say create a task. We're going to create a div. I'm going to give this a class name because I think I have some styles associated with this one. So say create task. That's just to make it pretty. We're going to have an input. This is going to be of type, we'll say this is a type text. This is going to be the name of our task. This is going to, we don't need a value, but it is required. We might have a placeholder here. Whoops. Let's go ahead and take a look. There's our thing, and let's go ahead and make a button. Let's also actually include another input here. This one's going to be a type hidden because it's not actually something we're going to fill out, but we do need this for context in our form. So we're going to say name is equal to project ID. If you ever did any PHP development like I did in the old days, this stuff, this hidden input stuff it's like coming back from the past. We used to do this a lot with PHP requests, or probably pretty much any external server work. It's not something we do a lot of anymore in React because we prevent the default behavior and we just send up whatever data we want. So we're bringing back some old school patterns here. So we'll say our button is new to do. Give it a class name. Cool. All right. Should work. Awesome. Let's go ahead and say our method here is equal to post, and our action. What is wrong here? Oh, that's not my form component, is it? My form's up here, and my action is going to be equal to slash projects. Slash to-dos slash create. And I can't remember if forms need an absolute. Let's try this out. I'm just curious. So we just get our response here. So I think what we need to do here is, what am I missing here? To do slash create. We should get the actual view from our response here instead of navigating. But actually, no, that's false. We are navigating away. So forms by default actually navigate you away to another endpoint. And we want to prevent that. We don't want to navigate with this request. We just want to make the request and retrieve it at the same URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to use another component from Remix. This one's actually going to come from a hook. We're going to call useFetcher. And a fetcher is what you might expect it to be. It's an object that allows us to fetch data from an external resource given a specific form from that fetcher. So we're going to say this is our create to do fetcher. And we're going to call useFetcher. And this is going to allow us to make that request without actually navigating away to a different view. So we're going to change this to create to do fetcher dot form. And this is going to change the behavior of our form. So instead of navigating, we're going to get a response that contains our data. So if I refresh this and say, you do see that the last request was still successful because we see that task, right? Which is nice. And now we have been able to create our to-dos by hitting that endpoint. Let's see if we've got any questions so far. We're good for the moment. All right. So we've got our new to-do out of the way. Let's go ahead and handle the completion of individual to-dos. So I'm going to, what I want to do is I want to create a form for each individual to-do. And the reason I want to do that is because each to-do is going to have its own identifier that we want to use to send to that form. So I'm going to start here. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out all this stuff and create a new component and call it to-do item. And I'm going to create a new component up here at the top just for a little clarity. To do item. And we also want to call a hook in this function. We want to call useFetcher. And of course, we can't call hooks dynamically, rule of hooks. So I need to abstract this into a separate function. So I'm going to say complete fetcher is equal to useFetcher. And I'm going to go ahead and return what I had before. But inside of my list item, what I want to do, I don't need this key. I do want to take a to-do as my prop. But inside here, I'm going to say I want to complete fetcher.form. I want to move all of this stuff up inside my form. And I want this thing to have an action. And this is going to be to-dos / I'll say to-do ID / complete. That's our endpoint for completing a particular action. And so my input here, I want to say my checked state is equal to to-do.completed, I think it was. That's the property that tells us whether or not it's completed. And I also want to say on change. So I don't want to submit this form with a submit button. I want to submit it every single time I change the state of our checkbox here. So we're going to get an event here. And so I'm going to say completed fetcher dot submit. We can call submit imperatively on our form. And I want to say dot target. So our checkbox has a form property. So I want to submit this particular form that this checkbox belongs to when I change that thing. And I already have a name. It's completed. I think that matches our API that we set up. So I'm going to save this now. Some goof, cannot read properties of undefined, reading ID. It's because I have not passed in to-do to my to-do item. Let's go ahead and do that. And I also need a key here since this is a list. All right, try that again. Boom. All right. So if I do this right, of course I did not. Let's see if we got anything in our console here. So something is missing here. So we've got our form. Oh, it's not making a post. Remember, default is a get. And so that means we would be trying to call a loader for that route. Now we should check our to-dos. And if I refresh, they should be completed because we've actually updated our database with that record. So that's mutations in data with Prisma, with actions. We've now brought this thing to life. I have this to do to add an input to create a new task. We actually can remove that because I did that. Create a new task. Yeah, right there. We did that already. We can delete that guy. So we can now create a new task. Workshop. Awesome. Any questions so far about actions, about mutating data, working with data on the server? Anything so far before we move along? How much time we got left, by the way? It is 9:26 my time. I think we have till the top of the hour. Is that correct? Are we running low on time?
20 minutes.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's actually great. So, because the final thing that we're going to do, the last exercise, is what we sort of insinuated we would be doing in the workshop with optimistic UI. I'm going to talk a little bit about what optimistic UI is. First of all, does anybody not know what optimistic UI means? Any hands? Don't feel ashamed. Okay, we got a few. So optimistic UI or optimistic updates essentially means that a request is going to take some time. We're going to have to do some work on the server. It's all asynchronous. And potentially, if you have a slow connection, it's going to take some time to complete that task. So if we take a look at our checkbox that we created for our to-dos, we're making this request when we change the checkbox. But what if that request is happening very slowly? Just quickly before I change exercises, I want to say, wait, I think I have a simulate slow request utility, and this is just going to give us a slow timeout. So if I've got a slow network and the user is, oops, did I stop the service? I did. And if the user they're on a train going through a tunnel and I'm saying, I want to complete these tasks, and I click one, nothing happens. I click another one, nothing happens for a minute. Eventually it'll work, right? But it's really slow. I have no feedback to tell me that this thing is actually doing anything. So what I might do is I might throw a loading spinner on there and say, disable the checkbox while this thing updates and give me a little loading spinner and tell me, hey, this is taking some time. Wait a minute. Eventually it will update, right? But that's also really annoying as a user because now I've got to wait on this thing to run, right? The cool thing about optimistic UI is we can guess what the next state is going to be when our request fulfills. And checkboxes are a great candidate for that because there's really only one option, right? Like if the checkbox is complete, when I click it, it should be incomplete, which means the next update should be this thing is no longer complete, and vice versa, right? It's a Boolean. We should be pretty confident that as long as this thing, as the request succeeds, we know what the next state's going to be. So we should be able to update it before the request is fulfilled to give the user a much snappier experience. If you use Twitter, I'm going to like someone's random tweet here, whatever I see up top. Look, this is a great tweet. I'm going to like it. Boom, heart, immediately, immediate feedback. Even though this request for this to like that tweet, to update that database and tell Twitter I've actually liked this thing, that takes some time. But it immediately gives me that feedback when I click like and unlike. Poor Ben is getting spammed right now with my notifications, but that's okay. We can do the same thing with this checkbox so that this request feels very, very snappy, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and stop this process. I'm going to run my exercise number 4. So make sure you're running that exercise and go into exercise number 4 inside of our app. We're going to go back to our singular project view. And we're going to go again. This request. Oh, it's on a different port this time. So let's open up our new app. Go to a project. This one I've wired up to delete, which is kind of nice. All right, so we've got these tasks. When I mark complete, let's go into complete. My complete route. Dues, complete. I want to make sure that this thing is simulating that slow request so that we can see what we did. This just comes from the utils folder, by the way, if you want to add this in your app. Simulate slow request is the name of the function. So we just import that from utils. And now you can see that this thing is going to take a second before it actually does anything. So how can we implement optimistic UI? So traditionally, optimistic UI has been very, very difficult. And the reason for that is you have to consider a lot of things when you're building optimistic UI. What happens if the user repeatedly clicks on that checkbox, right? They click on it super fast. Every single click is making a request to the server. These are all asynchronous functions. And now we have to deal with race conditions. What if the second click responds more quickly than the first click? And we get that result back. And then the UI is going to flash because we're going to be in an indeterminate state or the wrong state based on what the user's expectations are, right? So if we click these things really fast, we're going to have trouble. We're going to have to go and implement promise cancellation, fetch cancellation. That's a whole pain, especially when you're doing it on a different server somewhere that lives outside of your app. And so traditionally, this has been kind of hard to do. And so I'm really glad to say that Remix simplifies this a fair bit. Somebody asked if useFetcher is the more advanced version of the form. No, useFetcher, don't think of it as an advanced version. It serves a different function. The form component is intended to make a request to the same route or navigate you to a different route because we emulate the browser's behavior. Browser's behavior for a form normally is that when you make a request through a form, you navigate to that endpoint, as we saw when I goofed up before, and we navigated to the endpoint, which just gave us the data. Right? We didn't want that. We wanted to stay in the same view. So useFetcher is specifically if you don't want to navigate away after you make that request, whereas form will always navigate you to wherever that request lives. So that's the difference there. Cool. So let's go back into our project here and think about what we would need to do to optimistically update this checkbox experience. So I'm going to take a look at this to-do item component that I created. I've got a couple different fetchers here. I've got a delete fetcher and a complete fetcher. Delete, as you might imagine, is going to delete a specific to-do. I'm going to go ahead and delete as well and say, we've already simulating a slow request there, so that should be good. And then so complete again, just to check. Yeah, it's going to take a second. So what we can do here is we can infer the state of our to-do. We can say our is completed state is based on the to-do's completion state, which is what we're doing now. We can say instead, we can infer it from the state of our fetcher. And our fetcher object has lots of information about the state, which is really nice. So I'm going to say by default is completed is equal to do.completed. And I'm going to say if, and this is going to look a little gnarly. Keep with me. You can always abstract this logic into helper functions, but I want to make sure that we're spelling out exactly what we're doing. So if, in my if clause, I want to say if we are currently submitting, or if we're loading the next data, so we've already submitted and the next data is on its way back to the browser, we can say if we're loading the action data after a submission. So if we're doing either of these things, we want to go ahead and say is completed is equal to, we're going to infer a Boolean value here, and we're going to say completed fetcher dot submission. This tells us information about the submission that is in flight. And we're going to say form data, and we are going to, actually, this is always going to be true, and I'll explain that in a moment. But our form data is, and we're going to get, so we can get the form data from the submission that we sent off, right? We don't have to wait for it to come back. We can say, what did we send to the server in this request? So we're going to get this completed state. And if it has any value, like if it's equal to on, right? Or we could even say, if this is equal to on, that might be a better way because we need to know. If it's completed, if we've sent a request that includes on, then we know we can infer that the next state will be completed. So I'm going to check to see if my fetcher, we have a state string here, and it's going to tell me if we're submitting. This means we're currently submitting, or if our fetcher type, there's different types of fetchers, is an action reload. So if this fetcher is responsible right now for reloading the view through an action submission, which we are, and if the completed fetcher dot state is currently loading, right? So if we're loading and we are waiting for the action to reload, then we can infer the next state of our checkbox. So if I go down here and in my checked thing here, I can say this is now our completed property. Now, if I go back to my view and refresh, I'm still simulating that slow request, but these things respond instantly now. I know this is a lot to type and you might not have caught up with everything as I was typing it. I'm going to go ahead and just pop this in the chat window so you can see exactly what I did here. You can also check the final version of this exercise and see all of this stuff in action. But we've now optimistically updated each of these actions, right? What if I wanted to do the same thing for create a task, right? Go into my create thing here, and for optimism to do, or that's my final, sorry. Let's go back into my directory and just go into to do ID or to do create. That's what if we wanted to also await simulate slow request here. We're going to create a new thing here. It's going to take a second, and then it's going to show up. Would we want to optimistically update that? Make that a little faster? I would suggest for this particular case, probably not. Optimistic UI is something that you want to choose very carefully. I would choose it for tasks that you know what the next state is going to look like. And in this particular case, why would we not know necessarily what the next thing's going to look like? Any guesses? Just yell it out if you know it, or if you think you might have an idea. So we might think, I know the next state, right? The next state is I add a thing to the end of the list. Well, that's not necessarily true, because these requests can be fired off concurrently, or they can be fired off at rapid fire pace, and we might end up with a race condition, right? Now, Remix does handle for you by default all of your race conditions, in the sense that if you make multiple simultaneous requests, it will cancel the previous request, which is quite nice. But there are ways in Remix that you can change that. And you could end up in a state where the second request comes back later, or since we are handling those cancellations, the first request gets added prematurely, and then as soon as that's canceled, we actually pull that back after everything is resolved, right? And then you get this flash where it's not the actual state anymore, right? So instead, what we might want to do, instead of optimistically updating it, is we might want to we'll go back into here and say, inside of our actual, go back into the component, I could use the same technique to, instead of optimistically updating, determine that this thing is currently in flight and we need to we need to disable the form to prevent a second thing from being fired off. Does that make sense? So we could say if create fetcher dot state is equal to submitting, or same situation, if create fetcher dot type is equal to action reload, and create fetcher dot state is equal loading. Then we can say is creating equal to false, and then we can just set this to equal to true. Yeah, you could just set it to the state directly if you wanted, but I think this is a little bit more clear. And then we can use this to go ahead and disable our form for creating new tasks so that the user gets some feedback to tell them, hey, this thing's busy. Please don't submit me again while I'm working. So let's try that. I might not be able to see it on the screen up there, but it does disable the field and dims the view a little bit so that, and it prevents you from actually creating a secondary input there. So this fetcher state is really, really powerful. You can infer all of your state. Has anybody noticed that we've not called use state a single time in this application? I think that's pretty cool. We've used one effect, I think, maybe. I don't remember if we've even called used effect. I like to call Remix the use state killer. It pretty much manages much of the state for you in your application, which is pretty great if you think about it. Even though we haven't called use state, we haven't pulled in Redux, we haven't gone off to use Formic, we really haven't had to manage much state because we manage it on the server through our URLs. And I just think that's awesome. Like, reduces complexity. We can infer our state from whatever the state of the server is giving us, instead of actually managing it in our components, which I just think is really, really awesome. But we are almost out of time. So we don't have time to wire up every single action you could potentially take here. But the important thing here with optimistic updates to me is think carefully if you want to optimistically update the UI and why or why not you might be able to. One thing we didn't do is actually handle any errors, which I think is kind of important. So I'm going to go back real quickly into my to-do, and we're going to go ahead and handle. So what if the to-do creation actually fails, right? We might want to do something. So I'm going to use my first effect. I'm going to use this effect. This is my first effect that I'm going to write, and hopefully my only effect. And I want to infer rather a new state and say, errored during completion. That sounds like a good name for it. And we're going to say false. But if our complete fetcher state is done, if we finished our completion, then we want to check for a couple other things. We'll say if complete fetcher dot data. And so the data is anything that comes back from that fetcher, right? In our create action, remember, we return some data. We return this to-do data, which we should generally do from our actions. We want to give us some data. So if we have data, and if our complete fetcher dot data to do, if we have some to-do data specifically, I think this is then we want to say our to-do is equal to complete fetcher dot to do. I think maybe I've gotten something wrong here. Let me double check my final here. Cheat just a little bit. See what I goofed up on again with my types. I didn't even do this in the type. So I may be getting something wrong here from a TypeScript perspective, but I'm not sure what it is at the moment. But we can go ahead and see if we have some data, if we're done submitting, and we have data, we can say is completed is equal to do. We can just defer back to the completed state, and we can say our to do comes from whatever data we have there. And then otherwise, we can say is completed, or we don't even need to set that again. We just say if we're done and we don't have data, we could say error during completion equals true. And then we can use that in our effect to say if we have an error, you know, window.alert or whatever. Error during completion. And I'm pretty sure I goofed this up somewhere in the actual state here. So if we're done, we should have some data potentially. Complete fetcher state. Should always turn false and idle submitting and have no overlap. Am I in another clause here? This is clear. Oh, hold on. Idle. Sorry. If complete fetcher state is idle and complete fetcher dot type is done. Sorry, I got the wrong property there. A new TypeScript was going to help me out. So if we don't, so all right, that clarifies it. This is what we want. So if we've erred during completion, which we've set here, then we need to alert the user and say, hey, there's an error. That way we're not just flashing the checkbox on and off when something goes wrong. So if I go back to complete, and let's say after we simulate a slow request, I'm just going to return some empty data instead. So we don't have a to-do here, right? So I'm just to simulate an error. So after my slow request resolves, after I click, it's going to tell me, hey, you have an error. And once I dismiss the error, the complete state should go back. So users informed, we've gracefully handled that error. And that's pretty much what you need to know for optimistic UI updates. And that's all we have time for, which is fortunate that we've made it through. Does anybody have any questions? Hopefully more now that we've finished everything. I can't see everybody. Are we leaving? Is anybody there? Hello? All right. Well, I think we must be done because I don't see anybody in the room anymore and they must have kicked us out.